one of the things that I'd love to talk about is ritual as a way to shine a light in the darkness. When you're in a darkness to do with loneliness, or you're in a darkness to do with ill health, or when you're in a darkness to do with being dysfunctional within your community or the people that you love, one of the most powerful things you can do, I think, in my experience, is to do some little ritual. And the simplest one that I ever heard of is just light a candle, like a night light. And you can do it in front of an image of the Buddha, or an image of some famous saint, or an image of, any of the holy saints in the Christian tradition. But you could do it in front of, might be a picture of your loved one. There's different ways to use ritual, but to use ritual to make you feel that there's a light in the darkness. And when we go into this month of December, it's a journey into darkness, but it's also a journey into discovering light. Per tenebras ad lucem, finding light in the darkness. So I'm going to talk about all that in the next podcast, which will be available after this one, or certainly sometime over the weekend. And this one I just wanted to share with you how I was feeling about the darkness this time last year, exactly this time last year. I had been in hospital. I'd come out of hospital. I was facing into the winter. We didn't have any vaccinations at the time. We were all very worried about COVID. And I was doubly worried because I had been weakened by the operation, and the operation hadn't been fully successful. So I was facing into a very vulnerable winter until they would come and give me another operation, which they did in March. And at this time last year, I was just out of hospital. And there was a man in the hospital beside me, and he loved Netflix. I knew because when his wife and children spoke to him on Skype, they always talked movies. He never spoke because he had very little movement in his body. His limbs remained motionless beneath the blue blanket. And when a nurse propped an iPad in front of him, his wife did all the talking. And sometimes she'd say things like, "Lift your finger if you agree with me." And every time she said, "I love you," his finger rose to acknowledge her. All his children were in the frame on his iPad, and I could hear them reassuring him of their love. His mates at work missed him, and they hoped he'd be back soon. And sometimes after I left the hospital, I'd wake in the night thinking about him, wondering if he was at home with his family, and if he was improving. I remember another night watching a man in pyjamas heading for the toilet. He was old, but he stood as straight as a rod, and he used an umbrella as a walking stick. I thought I was dreaming, or that perhaps he was dreaming. Maybe he thought he was walking around his native village. So I asked him if he was okay. "I'm good," he said. "I just couldn't find the walking aid." He too reminded me. When I went home, I thought again about him. He stayed with me, and of course I could never forget the Romanian woman. Now the Romanian woman, she was a small, dark-haired lady in the next bed who offered me an orange one day. I instantly refused, and then I felt ashamed. Her generosity had threatened my privacy. Taking the orange might have entangled me in her kindness, and I didn't want to encourage that sort of familiarity. Hospital was a territory I perceived as dangerous. Too many unwanted intrusions. I folded my arms and wrapped myself in a dressing gown like it was the Berlin Wall. But no matter how I tried to protect myself, life in hospital is always about vulnerability. And for me, that was a learning curve. When Joe Biden was declared president-elect in America, I was back home watching CNN in the company of my beloved. Little flames flickered in the stove. We opened a bottle of wine and waited for hours to hear Harris and Biden give their speeches. But when the beloved went to bed, I stayed up and ransacked the kitchen for beer. I was gripped with excitement, although it was more contempt for Trump than any love for Biden. I even watched a movie on Netflix about a hitman called The Irishman. It was as if hating Trump wasn't enough. There was an emptiness inside me after Biden's victory, and I needed someone else to fill it. So Scorsese's movie gave me what I wanted, a dark monster that never bends, but squirms as he dies. And I felt so passionately about Trump that any amount of alcohol seemed perfectly fine in the circumstances. Or so I argued as I opened each fresh tin of lager. The darkness has been defeated, I declared, as I entered the bedroom. But the beloved heard nothing. She had been asleep for hours. Trump has been banished. The light of Biden shines upon us, I says. And when I tried to get into bed, I fell on the floor clutching a pillow like it was a life raft. Not that I cared. I was so consumed by contempt for Trump, my elation at Biden's victory, that nothing else mattered. It was only when I went to sleep and began dreaming that the truth surfaced. I saw an old feeble man in pyjamas walking across a car park in my dreams. He was carrying an umbrella as a walking stick. I thought it might be Joe Biden, and he turned to me and gazed into my eyes. "You think you'll never grow old," he said. "Why are you angry with me?" I wondered. "Because you were never really on my side," he replied. I sat upright in the bed, suddenly aware that a week in hospital had drawn me towards a new threshold. No matter how much I had cheered for Biden, I was in ways more like Trump than I had ever admitted. Terrified of vulnerability, terrified of aging, terrified of being seen as weak. I could hide from those simple realities in hospital, but when I came home, it was easier to gloat on Trump's defeat rather than reflect on how the soul constantly needs healing, every bit as much as the body. And when I look now on that dream, I'm amazed because I think that dream has fulfilled itself in my life in the past year. You know, that was the first time. It was a disturbing dream to meet an old man in your dream and him to accuse you, to look at you and say, "Oh, you think you'll never grow old." And I remember him in the dream asking that question, "Why are you angry with me?" And he says, "Because you were never on my side." It's like the old man in me was angry with me because I had never supported him or thought about him or felt I belonged to him. And in the past year, I've had 2 adventures in hospital, and both of them teach me that I'm aging and that it's okay to age. And I have to be kinder to the old man inside me and let him surface and let him out. So I'm just amazed how much changes even in a year. Even in the year since I wrote that. And I'd love to read you one more memory from that time last year. And this is a memory from the 3rd of December, 2020. I was in Beaumont for a checkup last week. I drove up before dawn, and heading east towards Dublin, I watched the red morning sun creep up into the sky and then vanish into the clouds. This midwinter morning is a miracle, and I was happy. I parked in the car park and I was quickly directed to outpatients through a tunnel. My temperature was checked. I got a number for a queue and was escorted down a corridor and into the relevant waiting room for my consultant. You would think that by now I'd be finished with doctors, but no. I still trot along every now and then for checkups and follow-ups, and sometimes just rectal ups. Dying is part of life at every age, but in people over 60, it becomes the norm, the central focus. Not that I'm suffering from any underlying condition. I don't have any major disease or ailment to worry about. But the fact is that the body deteriorates. Maybe people don't know anymore. Certainly, when I look at famous actresses on television in their 80s and still exercising like young things, I'm inclined to think that the world is in denial. There were about a dozen chairs in the space, all with safe distance between each one, and I took the one that was empty, the only empty seat, and was in the corner. Almost happy I was with the thought of not being crushed between two other patients. There was a novelist on Sky Television talking about long-term friendship, and there were two women beside me trying to move their chairs closer together. A member of staff came out from behind the desk and said that they were not allowed to move the chairs. "But we can't talk to each other if we're far apart," one of them said. "She's deaf." "Yes," the other one agreed. "I'm deaf as a board." Well, the staff person explained, "We have to obey the regulations. You need to protect yourself against germs." "But we live together," said the First Lady. "We're sisters. We're going to see the doctor." This presented a problem for the staff. The two ladies had obviously slept in the same room, drank tea at the same kitchen table, and talked to the same dog before making sure he had done his toilet in the garden and locking him securely in the kitchen before they left. Now they were in the hospital, and they were being separated by 2 meters because that was the rule. But the staff insisted that rules were rules, and that was the end of it. The two ladies continued to talk to each other about the inhumanity of the world, and didn't seem to have any difficulty in understanding each other. I wanted to linger and hear more, but I was called to be weighed by a nurse, who put me up on a small machine, noted my 94 kilo, and wrote it on her chart. And some time later I met the doctor. He was sitting behind the desk in a white coat and wearing a blue mask. My mask was black, and it was hurting my ears. As he was about to speak, a drill began to roar in the wall behind me. He had to stop talking until it finished. "The builders," he said, when it stopped. Then it began again. I waited until it finished. "Yes," I said. "I guessed it was the builders." The machine started another run at the wall. He waited again until it stopped. "COVID," he explained. "There's some alterations urgently needed." The drill began again, and I waited. "I understand," I said. "There's no problem." Then he went out onto the corridor to see if he could find another room. But someone told him all the rooms were full. I heard a woman's voice assure him that they had promised to stop at 8 a.m. and that she was presently negotiating with them. And they had assured her that in another 5 minutes it would all be over. He returned to me, apologized, and asked to examine intimate parts of my body. I lay on the couch, and he closed the curtains, although there was no one else in the room, only us, and I leaned over on my side to give him access with his machines to the subject of his curiosity. And the drills in the wall came closer still, so that I expected them any moment to burst through the wall, and then I'd see the eye of the builder looking in at me. But it didn't happen like that. In fact, the drilling stopped. The doctor gave me a positive assessment of the healing process, and within minutes I was walking down the corridor, a free man once again. Free until the next examination. That's what it's like at 65. You take your freedom in small pieces. As I passed through the waiting room, the two old ladies were enjoying Sky Television, and the novelist who had written a book on long-term relationships. "We must get that book, Sarah," one of them said. "Yes," the other one replied. "You could read it to me. That'd be lovely." And that happened this time last year. And little did I know, I thought I was at the end of the medical process. Little did I know I was only at the beginning, that the whole operation would have to be done in a bigger way later on in March, and that I'd spend from March until now recovering. Well, I'm still recovering, but I'm a healthier man than I was 12 months ago. And I have come to terms with the ghost inside me, the old man who says, "You're never on my side," the old man who's angry with me. Well, he's not angry anymore because I've realized he is me. And to become old is okay. And to be more vulnerable is okay. I think there's a lot to be learned in it. I can't explain how much joy it gives me to feel that the more fragility I have, the more happiness I have. One comes from the other. Protecting myself against the world to hold on to happiness never really provided the kind of bliss that comes when you surrender and you feel vulnerable and you feel, well, let it all go. Whatever happens, happens. And then, unexpectedly, happiness comes and sits on your shoulder. This is for the 3rd of December 2021. It's just a little bit of storytelling, and the reason I used those two pieces of memory from last year is because I'm presently using them in my new book. The book that I'm writing at the moment will be for next year. The book that's in the shops at the moment is called A Cloud Where the Birds Rise. I hope you buy it and make a lovely Christmas gift. I hope you keep enjoying the podcast and that you tell your friends about it. It's a pleasure to be present with you. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.